just be my imagination. Whatever it is that's watching, it's not human.
We are back with another episode of Bratspin Reviews. I'm Jared Bratt, host and filmmaker. You can find a link to my psychodrama feature film streamer. I've included that in the description below. Available to watch on Tubi. Joining me, as always, fellow host, filmmaker, interviewer, reviewer, host of the Hey You Made Your Movie show, Carl Diamond.
Hey Jared, it's so good to be here, but I gotta tell you, just like the bugs that are crawling all over me, crawling through my hair, I gotta say one thing, don't fucking touch me, I do a lot of cocaine.
Okay, man.
That of course is a quote from the movie.
That's too much of a 2004 drug.
Stupid fentanyl ruins everything.
And joining Carl and myself, fellow filmmaker, host, interviewer, reviewer, Robert Mitchell.
Great to be recording another episode with you guys.
Likewise. On this episode, we are talking about A Scanner Darkly, adapted for the screen and written and directed by Richard Linklater, released in 2006. Guys, this movie is wild, isn't it?
It is probably one of the wildest movies I've seen in recent memory. I watched it with my wife because she's a big Keanu Reeves fan. I said, hey, do you want to watch A Scanner Darkly? Because we're talking about it tomorrow night. She's like, I don't know. Someone said this movie wasn't for me. And she couldn't remember who said it. And I'm like, the animals don't get killed in it and there's no sexual assault. So I don't know. It seems fine. And then we watched it and she's like, okay, yeah, I can see why someone would say this movie wasn't for me. But it was probably the most challenging film I watched for this podcast. By the end, you realize it's amazing, but before you get to the end, you're challenged cinematically. And by that, I mean, the movie does not really hold your hand through any of its wackiness. It's definitely a Philip K. Dick story.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this movie. I have the soundtrack also on vinyl. This is one of the movies that actually caused me to go out and actually read the book. And I'm not like a huge reader, so very few movies make me go out and want to read the novel, especially after I've seen the movie.
Yeah, definitely got to go find the book because after that ending, you're like, man, okay.
I can't claim to remember to be able to give you an exact breakdown of here are the differences between the book and the movie. The movie does do that thing where, they take creative license and make one character out of multiple characters. There's just an overall kind of spiritual adaptation going on where it's more about bringing out the tone and getting into the nitty-gritty psychosis of rambling drug addicts. Who better to do that than Richard Linklater? It's interesting because when we were talking about Chain Reaction 2 episodes ago, I brought up this idea that before the first John Wick movie in 2014, Keanu Reeves was in a bunch of movies that just went under the radar. This would be one of them.
I remember when it came out and I was like, oh, cool, a Keanu Reeves movie. It's definitely of that era where people were doing a lot of really interesting things with CGI and digital effects in a movie, applying techniques that were very difficult to do in the past, but were easier to do now with computers. So I felt like, it's just kind of whatever. I never saw it and I didn't even watch the trailer and I kind of just passed it off.
We got some comments on the Chain Reaction episode. It was like, what? You guys didn't mention Constantine? First of all, we did mention Constantine a couple of times. Second of all,
we?
Yeah, we did. Multiple times. But also, the idea was that we were talking about Keanu Reeves movies that went under the radar that weren't box office hits. Because Constantine was a hit. It wasn't Matrix level, but it was a pretty big hit. Whereas Scanner Darkly, I believe it's released by Warner Independent, so it's already an indie movie. It doesn't have a wide release.
Talking to films that go under the radar, I consider myself, Linklater. I appreciate his work very much in his films. I own several of them. When this film came out, I didn't see it. Kind of fell through the cracks for me. And then I'm like, well, one day I'll watch that movie. I'm highly aware of the film. And I figured one day I would sit down and watch that film. Turns out that one day was about a month ago when we were discussing films that we were going to talk about in the future. And then I rewatched it today. When I'm watching these things for a podcast, I took the film in chunks and I take a lot of copious notes with it and look up things or whatever. And so I'm watching it in chunks and it took me quite a while to get into the movie. For me, initially, it was this overstimulation of visual information. I mean, this film assaults you visually. It's right in your face. Cut to today, I wanted to rewatch it because I'd already seen the movie and took most of my notes that I wanted to, or my initial impressions and all that kind of stuff. But I actually enjoyed the movie way much more the second time watching it. So I'm just like, yeah, visually it was amazing, but it's also super intense.
Oh, yeah. I just want to second the whole first time watching it and maybe the first act and like the half of the second act. It's hard to get into. It's a challenging film.
To what you just said, Rob, about how you can revisit it and then it becomes a lot better, I think also that's a testament to a really good movie. Like, I put Linklater in that category of like a Tarantino or David Mamet, early Kevin Smith, but like they all have a gift for writing long-winded dialogue. And I think that's part of the initial assault. Even like the trailers for Scanner Darkly would lead you to believe you're going to get a lot more like in-your-face sci-fi shit. And a lot of this movie is just, it's a hangout movie, and it's Linklater doing what he does best. You know, Dazed and Confused being an obvious reference. I've always loved Suburbia, another one of his underrated hangout movies that's also just a lot darker. I think I've heard Tarantino talk about how he'll use dialogue like an elastic band to literally like stretch tension out and have people talk to the point where you just want to get to the band snapping, that rubber band snap. Whereas I feel like in this movie, it's people talking to the point of like, you forget where they even started and where they're even going with the conversation. I find that aspect really brings out the psychosis. And then I do think that element really is a challenge, like you said, Carl, to sit through.
And like these people are, of course, highly fucked up on drugs. And in this case, in this world, it's this drug substance D. So I don't know anybody else's relation to people who do drugs. When I was much younger, I was around people that did a lot of hardcore drugs. And the most boring people you'll ever meet are people that are extremely fucked up. And I agree with you 100%, Jared, that Linklater, when he's really on his game, the Hangout movie is definitely a huge part of his wheelhouse. And another movie I'd throw in there is a movie that I love that came out a couple years ago called Everybody Loves Some, about a bunch of people going to university and baseball players. But anyway, it's another great hangout movie of his. One of the remarkable scenes is that bicycle scene where Robert Downey Jr.'s character Barris buys a bike because he thinks it's an 18 speed bike. And then he got it for like X amount of money, I think $50. It's cool because all the main characters are in the living room together. Keanu Reeves is Bob, Arthur, Winona Ryder's there as Donna, Robert Downey Jr. Barris, and then you got Woody Harrelson as Luckman. And then they're all like super just going on about this bike. And reading stuff about Linklater creating this movie is he was super happy to make it for such an independent, like the process of how it was made independently. Because he's like, this bicycle scene, it doesn't advance anything. You do really get to know the characters and you see them really highly strung out. But he's like, in any other instance, if this movie was made for any other studio kind of level, they would be like, this scene's got to go. And he's like, I kept that scene. I wrote the scene and kept that scene in there for the fans of the book.
That scene is hilarious. The 9 orphan gears.
Yeah. What happened to it's 8? Yeah. It goes from 18 to 9 and now 8. Like, how did that happen?
That's why when you revisit the movie and you realize these scenes are just meant to go on, you kind of got to like calm down and relax yourself into just the vibe of it. That's when shit starts to get better.
Once you're on board that this movie is, all the scenes in the beginning are just setting you up to get inside the mindset of Keanu Reeves' character and like the world he inhabits. It is a house full of drug addicts who are like babbling kind of incoherently and paranoid. On the first viewing, you're like, what am I watching? Where's this going? What's the point of any of it? Once you get over that expectation, you start to really soak into it.
We are all way too close to this. There's only one thing we can do to thwart the plot of these albino shape-shifting lizard bitches. We are going to take this bike outside, ask the first person we see. We're going to introduce a novelty. That way we get an objective viewpoint.
I'm curious, Carl, like, at what point in the movie, like, is there somewhere specific that you can point where you're like, oh, okay, I'm just on board with this trip now?
I accepted it late. For me, I was on board when he goes to do drugs with Winona Ryder, and it's just fucking weird. And then she's like, come by, have some tequila. It's okay. And he wants to, make out with her, like, get physical. And she's like, no, I do a lot of cocaine. Don't touch me. And I thought that line was so fucking bizarre.
It pays off later.
Oh, it makes total sense later. That twist is, I kind of saw it coming because, you pay attention to the gait of those suits. And those suits are fucking awesome. The suits are the best part of the movie as far as sci-fi goes.
Yeah, like initially, like watching that and you see him come out in that meeting in the suit and you're like, holy fuck. And you're like, this is why this film is animated the way it is.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Once within the scramble suit, cannot be detected by even the latest in voice and facial recognition technology. The scramble suit itself is purportedly made up of approximately 1.5 million fraction representations of men, women, and children in every variant, making the wearer of a scramble suit the ultimate everyman.
This is terrible.
Anyway, yeah, at that point where he walks out on her and then goes to get, first I thought it was a hooker, but I think it's just another girl he knows. And then he has sex with that girl, and then she's suddenly Winona Ryder, and then she's not. And then he goes back and looks at like the footage. That moment I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of a losing your shit kind of movie. I get it now.
And at that point, that's when everything really starts to ramp up. Him losing control of, what's real and all that. The thriller vibes start to kick in there.
Yeah.
And it has that great moment when all those doctors' visits, so uncomfortable. Those scenes where he's talking to the doctors, and the doctors are like smiling and everything and trying to be like cool with him. And then he goes to his superior, and then everything kind of turns to shit for Keanu Reeves' character. Because it's like, oh, here's what was really happening. That moment was like, oh my God, what a terrible moment for that character. Reality is flipped on its head. Not only are you strung out on drugs, but you had no choice in the matter. I mean, he kind of had a choice, but like what he thought was part of the job was actually breaking the rules of the job. And then he has no one to back him up. And then they reveal that Winona Ryder is his boss the whole time.
Yeah, she's Hank and he's Fred.
That revelation too later was crazy. Like the whole third act I think is fantastic. It really makes you look at everything else in the movie in a different light.
It's extremely difficult to capture a drug experience cinematically because as a viewer watching people on drugs, it's really hard to be a filmmaker and capture that vibe of being on drugs. And I think Linklater and his animation team that brought life over top of the actors, the way that everything's shifting subtly and moving, and of course the scramble suits. I started feeling fucked up watching the movie because, I mean, it's just so, as I was saying, just so overstimulation of visual information that's when I started getting vibing with the movie.
I have a note here that I wrote down, I think the middle of Act 1. It says, I both love and hate that this movie feels like a drug addict rambling at me.
Carl, you saying that moment that you got on board and you mentioned that scene. They're hanging out and they have that funny exchange. I just think it's just such great rambling, druggy, humorous jargon when he's talking to her about cats and she's describing how they're like 1 foot off the ground and he's like, you mean on the ground? It's just like one of the most mundane, comical moments followed by the horror of all this when he's like, I think this is getting bad. And then she's talking about going to a cabin on a farm and it's kind of like, the dream that they're never going to achieve, and then their hands stop holding each other and he just leaves and then he goes to the prostitute. This movie is fun and funny until it isn't, and then you realize, damn, this is really a tragic story.
I'm happy. Aren't you happy?
Listen to me. I think it's starting to get bad.
It was advertised to be a cyberpunk movie, but it really is a drug movie.
I love putting drug movies in this genre of drug cinema.
Yeah.
Like Fear and Loathing, Requiem for a Dream.
Trainspotting.
Yeah, so many, but they all have
like the fun beginning and then shit falls apart.
Enter the Void have you ever seen it?
I started it when I realized I needed to give this movie my full attention.
That movie fucked me up so much. It was a festival screening, so we saw it at like 10 o'clock in the morning. That right there is a high watermark for me for a drug movie.
From what I did see, I was like, man, this is going to take its toll on me.
That's one thing I wanted to talk about is tonally, this, like we've touched upon it, but holy fuck. Visually, it's in your face, and tonally, it's just as dark and as tragic as this movie is. I'm glad that there's these moments of levity, like when Freck is with Barris in the restaurant, and he's like, oh, we should get fruit pies, and Freck is already fucked up, and he's like, fruit pies are for old ladies.
Or Barris is trying to get Freck on board with the idea of having sex with Donna, and Freck's like, I just want to buy drugs from her, man. I don't want to have sex with her.
Yeah, I love that. Everybody else wants to sleep with Donna. Freck is like, no, whatever, man. I just want to get drugs. And then the scene where Barris has crafted his homemade silencer and he's out there with Freck and Luckman. And he's like, man, I made this silencer, and he fires it off. And of course, it's loud as fuck. And then they're all freaked out because now Gunn just got shot. And then I love when Luckman's like, for the next time for us, it will be a silencer because we're now deaf.
Just that moment, too, where you're like, Robert Downey Jr. has this aura of like this, smug asshole. And his performance in this movie is amazing. So on top of that, you have smug asshole who's also this disconnected from reality drug addict. And then he's like, I can make a silencer. And he completely fucks it up.
After it fails, he says, oh, I must have augmented the sound.
Yeah, that's the line.
Dude, he's phenomenal in this movie.
For me, in my money, he's the catalyst for the Marvel, the MCU, and the smarminess that he brings to Tony Stark. It's fun to think it began in this character.
I mean, check this out. He was in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang in 2005, does Scanner Darkly in 2006, does Zodiac in 2007, and then, leading to Iron Man 2008.
Well, and that's great that you brought up Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, because I was at the world premiere screening for that. And it's hard to think about that now because he's such a huge star and catapulted the MCU and Iron Man and all that. But in 2005 at Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, that was Robert Downey Jr.'s comeback. Nobody in Hollywood would work with him. It was like Mel Gibson and Jodie Foster vouched for him that he would be clean and sober and show up on set for Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And that's how Joel Silver hired him for the movie. So yeah, it's cool that Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and a year later he's doing a Scanner Darkly.
Also, working Shane Black dialogue on that movie. So it's like, again, in this movie, it's like he's no stranger to just tackling chunks of dialogue. It's just his performance is obviously completely different here. But yeah, for my money, I would have said, he should have been nominated for like Best Supporting Actor.
Mm-hmm.
That's the interesting / fascinating / extremely cool design that I would bet money Richard Linklater had a design in who he cast in this movie. If you look at the leads, Keanu Reeves, Robert Downey Jr., Woody Harrelson, Winona Ryder, and then even the actor who plays Freck, Rory Cochrane. He's the quintessential stoner in Dazed and Confused.
That's where I've seen him before. Okay.
All these actors are pretty infamous from the 80s, 90s for having that rebellious reputation.
Traumatic past.
Yeah, traumatic past. Kind of blows my mind that you have all these actors, especially when you look at the poster and you see all these actors' names together. Imagine if this cast was in the 80s. It'd be even more crazier. On the whole, I just think it's a very punk rock ensemble of actors.
It's a very punk rock movie, if you think about it.
Yeah, completely.
Another fascinating thing is the context of when films are made. After Waking Life, he wanted to do another animated film, and then he started thinking about adapting a Philip K. Dick work. And he started doing that in 2001 and 2002, which is, of course, September 11th, 2001 happens and remakes the modern world geopolitically. And in America, you see the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the Patriot Act being passed. So you're seeing the infrastructure literally put in place in real time of highly developed surveillance state. So here he is adapting this work of Philip K. Dick, which is writing about these kind of worlds in the 70s and 60s. Whether he's aware of it or not, I'm sure he's highly aware of it, but his adaptation of this work, on some level, it was a film created with all of this going on politically in the giant landscape of the geopolitical world at the time as well.
I didn't even put that two and two together, that the whole idea of being watched constantly might have been a reflection of the Patriot Act.
The scary part is that we live in it now. I mean, the things were being put in place then, and we can speak to all the decades and all that, but in this modern era of this century, I mean, we, all of us are living in this world, and in 2006, when this film comes out, it still might have felt far away, but we now live in a world where the constant surveillance is real, and it's horrifying.
Hey, how you doing?
Well, I'm all right.
Anything wrong?
This fucker stole $50 worth of shit from us today, and my boss said it was somehow my fault, and it's coming out of my paycheck, which I don't even think is legal. I mean, can he legally do that?
You thought about that way more than I did. As far as the surveillance stuff goes, which is cool. I didn't even think about. I was more trying to figure out what the drug did. Even my wife was watching the movie going, for a movie about this drug, what the fuck does the drug do? And that's kind of what a cool realization that washes over you in Act 3 is the drug is doing what you're seeing. The movie itself is giving you the effects of D.
That's interesting. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah, you're just like, I feel fucked up watching this movie. Why? Because I'm seeing what this drug actually does. There's one thing I love going back into the dark comedy of this movie and the dark, chunky humor going on is several times throughout the movie, characters are asked, well, how much of this do you do? And they all respond, not much.
Yeah, I think Keanu Reeves says that, and then Hank says, you actually do a lot.
Yeah.
There's a line that I just laughed out loud this time, and I've never interpreted this moment as a joke before in all the other times I've watched this movie. Keanu Reeves' delivery on the line and just the question and then the answer, it just made me laugh. Towards the end, it's at the end, Bob Arctor, he's been sent to the Newpath clinic, unbeknownst to him to be like an undercover mole, ultimately bring back evidence that Newpath is also the distributor. He's mopping just like the corridor, and then the staff member comes up to him, and then you find out later it's one of the cops working with Winona Ryder, but he's like, do you have any agricultural background? And then Keanu Reeves is like, I worked in an office. The delivery, it's so deadpan, and I'm like, is that a joke? I think that's a joke in there. I think Keanu Reeves, his narration is quite haunting throughout this movie. I mean, let's be real. We can talk about the criticisms that Keanu Reeves has had throughout his entire career, but I mean, if you want to talk about characters that he's perfectly in his wheelhouse, playing the drifting, Neo in The Matrix, there's some similarities to that character.
Or My Private Idaho.
Exactly, like just the stumbling dreamer or stumbling through a dream or a form of a non-sober reality.
Now in the dark world where I dwell, ugly things and surprising things and sometimes little wondrous things spill out at me constantly.
You mentioned it before, Carl, but he's meeting the doctors the first time he goes to do the tests. And then they're like, if you keep your sense of humor, you just might make it through this, which is a very creepy, and it makes sense later, but like such a diabolical tone, the way she says that to him.
Everyone else is like so shitty to him. When you look back at it, it's awful. Like, why would you do that to a person?
But I love when he goes off in that kind of like little bit of a monologue that he goes into. He's like, make what? Make time? Define your terms. It's cool to see Keanu Reeves, I find, just flex his monologue abilities.
Yeah.
Make what? The team? The girl? Make good? Make do? Make out? Make sense? Make money? Make time? Define your terms.
Do you guys interpret the ending? Like they talk about like hopefully when he's in New Path, some form of spark will go off in his brain and that'll cause him to like kind of snap back into it and realize and do something to help them prove that New Path is making the drug and distributing it. But do you guys interpret the ending that when he pulls the flower out of the field and he's like, I'll bring this back to my friends on Thanksgiving, is he aware of the fact that he's got a mission, or is his brain still fried so much that, no, he's just going to bring that flower back, but he doesn't really know the significance yet?
I don't think he is aware that he's being a cipher for surveillance. I think he's missing his friends and picks the flower to bring them some happiness.
Part of me thinks if we were to like be a fly on the ceiling in terms of maybe them having discussions about him playing in that moment, the performance, I feel like there's just that slither of like, he's somewhat aware. That spark could be going off.
To me, it kind of goes back to what Winona Ryder said in that scene where I guess they were at a coffee shop and she's like in full G-man mode and they're talking about what they did to him. And she's like, hopefully a spark will come back into him. Some reflex of who he used to be will kick in and he'll find the evidence we need. That's what I think is happening. He is so burnt out to the point where like he's essentially, a simpleton. Taking the flower and bringing it to his friends is all they need from him. That part of him is still there because it's kind of like the basic, oh, I'm doing something nice. They've stripped him down to just that. I don't think he's a cop. He's doing it as a simple-minded person. That was always part of the plan. We're going to bring him to that point. And then once he's at that point, he's the tool we need to take these guys down. It's really sick. It's so sick.
Yeah. That's why I guess I just want to believe that there's some sort of positive outcome for this character, because it's just,
Yeah, well, he's Keanu Reeves. He's likable. And you don't see too many movies where Keanu Reeves ends up in that kind of state. It's kind of weird to think about this movie and then think about how Philip K. Dick did kind of lose his mind in the end.
Here's another cool tidbit. Philip K. Dick had 3 children. They loved the adaptation so much after they saw it that they gifted Richard Linklater Philip K. Dick's personal copy of A Scanner Darkly.
Can you imagine making a movie out of a story you like, and then the daughters of the guy liked it so much they give you the guy's copy of the book? It's like oh.
For me, that would be the ultimate compliment because I love my books and first editions.
You mentioned, Rob, Waking Life. And it's funny because I saw Waking Life on video after I got my tonsils removed, so I was pretty high. Carl, you said challenging. I mean, that movie was, I remember even at the time, I was just not prepared for it. It's so dense, I find, that movie. When you look at A Scanner Darkly compared to Waking Life, I think A Scanner Darkly, the rotoscoping process has been a lot more polished and refined. As crazy as it sounds, A Scanner Darkly, I would say, is actually a lot more accessible. It's got more of a through-line plot that you can actually follow that has a beginning, middle, and end.
Part of that might also speak to how he approached the animation, because I read a couple times that he wanted this film to have more of a feel of a graphic novel, which actually made the animation very difficult to do on this film because there had to be a continuity. Richard Linklater spoke of, for example, Keanu Reeves' beard, and that has to have a continuity throughout the whole film, animation-wise. I want to talk quickly about what I think is my favorite scene in this movie, when Rory Cochrane's character, Charles Freck, is going to off himself. In order to do this, he also wants to gather artifacts, so when archaeologists find him. So he's holding a copy of Ayn Rand's Fountainhead. He was going to do it, but then he realized that the wine that he was drinking was not good enough, so he goes to a store and buys a $70 bottle of Connoisseur Merlot wine. And then the next thing you know, there's a creature from between dimensions standing beside his bed looking at him disapprovingly, and then that creature just looks amazing. And then it goes back to the dialogue, right? Freck, you're going to read my sins? It's going to take like 100,000 hours. And the creature's like, your sins will be read to you ceaselessly in shifts throughout eternity. The list will never end.
At least I have good wine.
Yeah, exactly.
Where did Substance D come from? Why can't we stop it?
Another thing I think we should touch upon, because he was very much a part of the Austin scene and kind of a joke, and then he became a player on the national scene. The conspiracy theorist, podcaster, junk salesman Alex Jones shows up in this movie as a conspiracy theorist.
Is Alex Jones actually in this movie?
It's right before Winona Ryder picks Keanu Reeves up in her car.
Oh, I thought in my head that might be Alex Jones. That actually was Alex Jones. That's wild.
Yeah, because that speaks to the darkness of, like, he's an actual real person that is steeped in darkness. In 2006 and 2005, when this film's made, most people would never know who this guy is. He was just some funny wingnut on local Austin public access television. So here we are again. You can see like this prescient thing that however he gets in the film, I don't know that story or anything either. So here's this guy in the film, and then all these years later, you see the darkness of him as a person and conspiracy theories in general.
Can we take a moment and talk about the very opening sequence of this movie? How uncomfortable and wonderful it is.
When Freck is hallucinating with the aphids all over his body in his place in the shower, and he's just cuts to him and then showering with his dog.
My wife almost walked off.
But then there's that other scene that I just think is just one of the cooler parts of the movie. Barris and Freck are arguing about how $3 could get you a line of Coke. Robert Downey Jr. is like, I'll show you. And then it just cuts to them in the car to the convenience store, getting the supplies back home. And it's just this cool, quick cut montage. Love that.
Did that ever pay off? Did he ever get Coke from that?
Yeah, I don't think there's a payoff, but, looking at his work with a silencer, it doesn't go well. That whole scene when they're all in the car driving to San Diego, and he's going on about how he rigged the house up with cameras in case somebody broke into their house when they weren't there. And they're like, well, how is somebody going to break in the house when we're not there? He's like, well, I left the door open. He's like, well, what about the windows or the back door? He's like, well, I left a note on the door saying the door's unlocked. And they're like, why the fuck would you do that? And he's fucking with them the whole time. And then you don't know if it's true or not. And then there's that great payoff when they're back in the house and the door was locked. So they're like, oh, he wasn't fucking with them. But then Donna wakes up and says, oh, the door was unlocked.
He talks so much that he himself can't even handle the circles that he's rambling in, to the point that he almost starts gagging.
Yeah, he can't even stop himself.
I find that just darkly funny because it's just like, Jesus. He doesn't even know if what he's saying is true or not. Like, it's insanity.
I just love that little drug. Was it Robert Downey Jr.'s character or was it the tweaker character that had the fantasy where the cop pulled him over and the cop just wanted to shoot him the whole time?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, Freck.
Because the cop was so stupid that he couldn't like do his job, so he decided he wanted to shoot the guy.
What's your name? Probable cause.
Yeah, that's a great sequence.
Well, I'll just say that in the genre of drug cinema, this is one of the best of the best. In the filmography of Richard Linklater, I think this is one of the best. If you can get past the alienation factor with being hit with this animation style and get past all that, I think, as we've said, this is a movie that deserves to be watched multiple times. And I think when you can actually kind of transcend the shock value of this movie and get into more of the hangout vibe, that's when this movie could really work for you. And I think it's one of Keanu Reeves' best performances as a legit actor.
Richard Linklater's adaptation of Philip K. Dick's seminal work, A Scanner Darkly, I think really does an exceptional job capturing the world that junkies exist in, the paranoia, the constantly shifting world around them, the hallucinations, the constant shift of reality with a drug reality. It's really amazing to look at this film from a work that was done in the 70s, looking ahead of what the future would look like. Look at our present world mirroring this world, and then extrapolating what this world, this fictional Scanner Darkly world, looks like mirrored to our world, and what will our world look like 20 years from now.
To me, it feels like a cyberpunk Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. If you're into weird movies, Keanu Reeves movies or cyberpunk movies, this is definitely a must-watch.
This is awe-inspiring stuff.
Oh, you there? Hello? No, they got me. I'm now Alex Jones.
They have to take one of us out, send a message.
Well, it was going to be the guy living closest to Anaheim.
Yeah, my audio cut out for a while.
Is this actually Carl right now?
Yeah, this is Carl. My internet warnings were legit, and
I don't know, man. You don't fucking sound like Carl. I'm starting to legit get paranoid, man.